Hello and welcome to the Michael Mamas Show. I'm your host, Michael Mamas, and we're coming to you from Mount Soma, home of the Sri Someshwara Temple in the mountains of Western North Carolina. Um, Boy, there's a lot going on. Every week there's a lot going on in the news. This whole thing with Trump and the indictment, and it seems pretty clear that everybody knows that the charges are with a purely legal perspective. It has not a leg to stand on. But interestingly enough, they feel like the political bias is so strong in Manhattan and that chances are he'll probably get convicted anyway. So we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. And actually, all this stuff, everything that's going on, it's all about people, and it's all about the relationships and how people relate to one another, and that's what makes the world go round, and that's pretty much the subject that we're going to be talking about today. The point is that there are different levels to what's called the ego, or the sense of self. And generally speaking, ego is a word that's used to kind of refer to the more superficial aspects of what ego is. And it's all caught up with a person's identity, with their belief systems, the narrative they cling to, the world they've grown up in and conditioned their mentality in accord with. And they're vested in it because the whole sense of self, a person's whole sense of self, generally speaking, tends to be on that superficial level of life, Interestingly enough, that's why I think religion and Christianity and all that's having so much trouble lately, is because people's allegiance is to that very superficial identity and an inner sense of that universality and that oneness, that divinity, if you will, has kind of fallen by the wayside, hasn't it? I think people are more vested in the narrative that they're identified with than they are with any, inner sense of what lies deeper than that identity, But now it's interesting because ego, that's superficial ego we're talking about. But ego exists like everything else in the universe. Ego exists transgradiently. It exists on all levels of existence. And on the deepest level of existence, what is the self? What is the ego? It's Atman, it's Chaitanya, it's pure Shiva value. It's the transcendent. It's what in Christianity they call the Christ. We are one with God, I don't know if I ever mentioned this in a podcast or not, but I remember once I was talking about that in a lecture, and I said that, everything, that's what everything is, you're one with God. This computer here is one with God. The camera is one with God. It's all coming out of that one unified field, that one thing that's the source of everything. And so, in that sense, I am one with God. I am one with the Christ, Somebody heard me say that. And it's funny how people... and so then what they went away with from that thing was that I was saying that I was Christ, And anyway, I don't really understand this. I guess it's because their sense of that universal divinity is so overshadowed by a more superficial value of what ego is that they couldn't fathom it any way other than that. I don't know. I don't really understand how they're thinking. Because you see, wisdom, wisdom is not a narrative. You can learn many different narratives, and you can learn the narrative that is taught by different spiritual teachers, by even great enlightened teachers like Christ or Adi Shankara. But see, when the master speaks, it ceases to be what the master said, and it becomes what the listener heard, and the listener hears in terms of narrative. So they take the teachings and they turn it into a narrative, and then they decide that because they understand the narrative, they understand the teachings. And I've really noticed this is especially true in the West that I call it the I get it syndrome. People learn that stuff. They read a book about Vedanta or what have you, and they decide that they're enlightened because they get it, and that's just an intellectual. It's turning it into a narrative. It's so far from what it really is. So anyway, that's what we're dealing with. Now, how does this relate to our daily lives, and how does it relate to our relationships with other people, be it people in business, or be it friends, or be it loved ones? It all is about the level of ego, the level of identity that a particular individual I'm getting phone calls here, so I'm shutting the phone off. Identifies with. And they become very vested in it. So what happens then is a person's sense of their own self-worth, their own value, gets caught up in that surface personality and how they come across. And if they say something stupid, which we all do, I say stupid stuff all the time, we all do, But if you're really vested in that superficial value of ego, then the very idea that you could say something wrong or say something stupid, it just feels like annihilation. It feels humiliating, even worse, invasive. It's a complete self-annihilation is how it feels. And so for that reason, people, they'll take a stand, they'll give a perspective, what have you, and they're identified with that. And so it's really almost impossible for them to move past it and let it go. And particularly in relationships, because if you take a stand and the person you're dealing with takes another stand, okay, right then a conflict has been created. And they're vested in their superficial value of self, which is identified with this, whatever stand it is they take. And so are you. And so there's a tug of war between narratives, between perspectives, that if any person can knock the other person off of that pedestal of their own narrative, it's just so annihilating that they refuse to do it, and that creates conflicts. It's important to understand wisdom is not a narrative. It lies beyond narratives. There's a section in the Jaimini Sutras, so it's a part of the Vedic literature, and there's a section in the Jaimini Sutras that makes a statement. It's all about It's about well, let's just leave it at that. Performance of action, really. And it says in there, like a statement, and then the next line is not so, or on the other hand, and then it gives another thing. And it just kind of goes back and forth like that. And at first glance, it may seem like, well, make up your mind, But what it's really speaking to is the idea that it's what truth lies beyond narratives. Truth lies beyond identity with a perspective. Wisdom is living in that place, because you see, ego, as it goes to, they talk about being free from ego. That's not right. It's a misunderstanding of what it means. Freedom from ego really has more to do with being awake to the deeper value of self, that transcendental self, that Shiva value, if you will. That and it's hard to describe, because in one sense it's a field of abstraction, but nevertheless it has a personified sort of component to it, concurrently with the idea that it's beyond relativity, it's beyond persona, but nevertheless, that's the deepest value of ego. And it's a value of ego that is not caught up in worldly affairs whatsoever. It's not caught up in being right. It sees beyond every perspective. On the other hand, not so by reason of, you see? And so even reading those parts of Jaimini Sutra and stuff, if the relationship with it is coming from that level, it cultivates it. It becomes a sense of freedom. It's not about grabbing onto this or grabbing onto that. Ego on that level is too superficial. Now, having said that, it's like you can pat your head and rub your belly at the same time, right? So that you still function in the world. And in the world, it looks just like anybody else in a sense. You still have on that level, you still have an identity, you still have a perspective, you still have a narrative. But concurrently with that, on a deeper level, there's a place within you that lies beyond it, that sees the absurdity even in any perspective, including the one that you're identified with, But it's not an attitude, it's not a philosophy, it's a state of physiology. It's like, does the kite have a tail that grounds it? Or does the kite not have that tail? Is it not grounded in that transcendental self? And so then it just goes off spinning, you see? So right now, so in your interpersonal relationships, or even between nations and all that, if you can come to the relationship with the tail, the kite having a tail, with being grounded in a place that sees beyond relativity, then you can make progress in communion. Because what is communion really? Communion really is the seeing in the other person, sensing in the other person that transcendental value, that value that lies deeper than the surface words, So really that is what seeing the divinity in the other person is like. And then when you're relating to them and you're talking with them, you're not so caught up and preoccupied with a narrow perspective that you lose the person, be it you're losing your own true self, or be it losing the sense of the other person that you're talking with. And so that's the real art of communication, you see. The world right now, here's the thing. We've talked about how the world is a fishbowl, and how the fishbowl is dirty, it's polluted, it's Kali Yuga, and right now we're in the depth of it. We've talked about how it's like water, and when water cools down, right when it gets to 30 degrees before it turns into ice, which is a more coherent crystalline structure. But right at that point, as it cools down, it gets more coherent, less bubbly, and then right at that point of 32 degrees Fahrenheit, it just starts to churn. That's where we're at right now. Everything is churning. And how does that manifest? How does that appear? Just look at the news. So much stuff is going on, and it's just so sick. And it's everywhere you look. It's look at the relationship with religions, and it's just crazy if you watch what's going on in the news, and uh, the whole notion of gender, and the politics, and the world is nuts. And why? Why is it nuts? It's because the pollution. All the It's like in a fishbowl. If the fishbowl is dirty, essentially all the fish are sick, at least to some degree. Some more sick than others. And so we're looking around, and everything's madness. Everything's crazy. Well, that's why. That's why. Um, if people are physically ill, we tend to, we feel bad for them. We feel sorry for them. It's, oh, they're sick, and so we give them a lot of space. We don't sit there and judge them. Oh, why are you sick? What's the matter with you? Blah blah. But the thing is, when the fishbowl gets polluted, the global consciousness, and it affects the individuals, it's not just physical. It's also psychological, emotional, mental. And so instead of, seeing what might be a crazy narrative out there and taking a opposite stance, and the whole thing becomes polarized, we do well to see deeper, and understand that, people are sick, and you can still love them. I guess that's, Easter, love thy neighbor, all that stuff. That's the deeper meaning of that, is that you see the person at a level beyond the surface, beyond the sickness that's there on the surface, shrouding the divinity that dwells deeper within, So when you see people act out like that, and you see the horrible things that happen in the world, you can feel hurt, you can feel pain, and the initial reaction, is judgment, hatred, even anger, resentment. But to the degree that we can, and again, this is mostly structured in the state of physiology, but nevertheless, I think, regardless of where your sense of ego lies, because it's a physiological thing, you see, really, but regardless of where it lies, even just knowing that and keeping that in mind, I think it's worthwhile, especially perhaps in this day and age when so much nutty stuff is going on. It's like everybody's crazy, And it also speaks to relationship in the sense that, in a sense, all relationships all the time are constantly a negotiation. Even if the relationship is great and there's waves of love going back and forth and all, nevertheless, there's always some little bird on your shoulder or whatever, some part of yourself that is attentive to, what you say and how you say it, because we're sensitive to the other person, and we don't want to hurt them. We don't want to trigger that knee-jerk first response in the person that just gets the whole thing off and running, and destroys any kind of, or really damages a relationship. So in that sense, it's all a negotiation. And now in many situations, like business situations or international diplomacy or that, it's all very much a negotiation. And it's important then in those situations, but in all situations, to be sensitive to the incredible vulnerability of human beings, and how we relate to them and how we speak to them. And a big step forward is if you, from your own self, when you say something stupid or wrong, or you can tell it was hurtful or wasn't phrased quite right, just if you can just say, hey, it goes a long way. Really just say, hey, what I said there wasn't quite right, or gee, that was a stupid thing I said, or what have you. That can go a long way into healing any damage that's done in a relationship by speech that threatens that superficial ego value. Because you see, you'll read in Vedic literature and I think Buddhism and probably everywhere else that state of spiritual growth or enlightenment or whatever, it's a state of freedom from desire. And so what happens then is we get confused because if I'm spiritually evolved and stuff, then I'm going to have no desire. I just saw this a woman who was into Buddhism for I don't know how many years, and she was being interviewed on TV. And they said, "Do you mean you have no desire?" And she says, "I have no desire." Well, on the surface level, it's normal and natural, regardless of your level of enlightenment, your level of consciousness, to have desire. What freedom from desire means is that you're awake to a level of your being that is beyond relativity, beyond desire, and so that level of your being is free from desire. But you still have desires on the more superficial level, and it's integrated with the depth of your being, which is beyond desire. And that's really the key to the whole thing, Moving on, there's this notion of equity, and I came across something about equity that I think I just should read it to you. This is from I just found it online, the National Association of Colleges and Employers. Okay, the National Association of Colleges and Employers. It says the term equity refers to fairness and justice and is distinguished from equality. Whereas equality means providing the same to all, equity recognizes that we do not all start from the same place and must acknowledge and make adjustments to those imbalances. Well, talking about an ivory tower of a notion of divinity that's just not real world whatsoever. No two people in that sense are created equal, as I've talked about before. You'll never find equity in that sense and on that level. And aspiring to that is just it's really a foolish ivory tower notion that, we have to compensate. And generally in the world today, it seems to be financial. The problem with that is even if you give somebody money, they're going to spend the money and use the money based on their current level of mentality. You give a drug addict a bunch of money and they're not all of a sudden going to be prosperous. They're just going to buy more drugs, for example, and so equity, first of all, it's not realistic. Some people are born smart. Some people are born stupid. Some people are born healthy. Some people are born unhealthy. Some people are born into a family and a culture that is highly dysfunctional, and it's bred that into the person's psyche. And trying to fix that, certainly, it's not going to work. Equity is an idealized notion that's an ice cream cone in the sky. It's just not realistic, The process is ongoing, requiring us to identify and overcome intentional and unintentional barriers. Well, good luck. Good luck. Arising from bias or systemic structures. The structures that are there and that will always be there are very much a function of the fact that there are inequities, that different people have different maturities. They have different levels of consciousness. They have different states of psyche. And what was really unbelievable to me was that the National Association of Colleges and Employers were kind of pushing this notion. I mean, I think it would be great if everybody could be great. Bob Dylan had a song about that, didn't he? What did he say as a poet? You say that you're better than no one, and no one is better than you. If you really believe that, you got nothing to win and nothing to lose, or I forget how he went. Anyway, it's just not real. It's just not real. All right, next subject. Scotty, let's talk about this one.
Okay. Yeah.
Oh.
Nope. Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, okay, sorry, I might. There was a nice quote I saw. One thing I discovered, there's a great way to get the news, and you might want to try this. Do you do this much, Scotty? I went on YouTube, and they have like the House Senate committee and things like that, just talking about things. They talked about COVID, and there's tons of them on YouTube. And it'll show, the Republicans like Jim Jordan or whatever, and then a Democrat senator, and then the tension between them as they debate and discuss different issues. The thing I like about it is now you get it right from them, the horse's mouth, what the Republicans are saying and what the Democrats are saying. It's not jaded, it's not biased, it's not distorted in any way. You're hearing them talk. Now, admittedly, you might think, well, it could be sound bites that are out of context, or it could be just sound bites that give us distorted perspective. But really, they'll show it extensively, and they'll show the interactions, and they give the Republican an opportunity to give their perspective, and then they give the Democrat an opportunity to give their perspective, and you see the whole back and forth. I'm really, these days, to me, that seems to be the best way to get the news and see what's going on. Do you ever do that, Scott?
Yeah, I do. I watch it all the time.
Oh, do you? Yeah, it's great. I just really got into it. I've seen it before, but I never really got into it like I did this past week. So at any rate, I got an email a few days ago from a listener, and they were asking about a few different things. And, we all have our perspectives, don't we? Based on the narrative we tend to be identified with. And so, for example, the January 6th thing. Scotty, the Republican perspective, the pro-Trump, if you will, perspective is all about what? He said peaceful demonstrate. He said, and then also and this was actually on YouTube recently. They were talking about the videos and how they released the videos of everything that was going on that day in the Senate, and it really exonerated a lot of the people because that were considered, to be invading the Congress. But what it showed is that the police officers were actually escorting these people in, and some claim that. Do you know anything about this guy? Some claim that even some of the people that were doing that are actually from the CIA or FBI.
Yeah, there were, a lot of FBI influence.
So they were like facilitating the thing just to intentionally create a negative narrative about the Republicans and what Trump did to create that whole thing.
It's just like what you were just talking about with the Jaimini Sutras. Depending on which way you want to look at it, you can look at it and you can find this narrative, or you can,
that's right,
interpret
because
it that
they were even debating that
Yeah.
in the Senate committee on YouTube, And one person would say that, and then another person would rebuttal and say, "Oh no, these people are criminals. They should go to jail. Look what they did. They invaded the Capitol, and you're just trying to spin it to make them look good." And one even said, it was wrong to even allow people to see those videos.
Yeah.
So the whole thing, you can. So what it amounts to is that people from their identity with a particular narrative claim to a certain group perspective, and then they frame everything that way. The other thing we came up was like Georgia, and what was it? Trump called the governor
Yeah.
of Georgia and said, all we need is 10,000 votes. Can you find 10,000 votes? And the Republican perspective on that was that so many votes were not counted. They were blocked, they were hidden, they were buried, but they're there. That's their claim. And so all he was saying is, we don't even have to find all the votes that were buried. All we need is 10,000, Now the other side of that coin, the Democrat perspective on that, was he was trying to conjure up 10,000 false votes.
Make up something. Yeah.
Yeah, just so they could win,
Yeah.
and that's a crime. But you see, there again, Jaimini Sutras, on the other hand,
Well, Michael, it's like right now, it's like it's like a magnet, and each camp is sucked to the poles. And like I've heard you say a million times, is that the gold lies in between the realities, right? Or whatever.
Yeah, the Shiva value, that's that silent witness value, that transcendental value,
Yeah.
that sees beyond the different narratives. Truth is not in a narrative. Wisdom is not in a narrative. It lies beyond it. But even if you watch the news, all the different newscasters are pushing their narrative. And that's just not where the truth is. You can spin things either way, and that's what's going on in the world today. The fishbowl is polluted, and wars are fought over that sort of a thing. The narratives get spun to the point where one group hates another group, and they declare war. They start. And other example, like the whole Charlottesville thing. Remember that, Scotty, when people were tearing down the statues, right?
Yeah.
For the Civil War and that. And this is one thing that I saw, and that was I saw Trump talk about the people that didn't want the statues torn down. And he made it clear that he was saying some of those people are good people. But right away, his hat got thrown in the ring with the KKK types and the racist types and the ones that wanted it up there because they, believed in racism. And but that's not what he said, and I saw that. But nevertheless, things get spun. I was talking to a friend of mine just the other day. I've known this guy for ever since the early 80s. He's a great guy. But I couldn't believe that he really hates Trump, And I think a lot of it is just by virtue of the kind of stuff we're talking about, Scotty. They keep one perspective, and it just builds, and that's on both sides,
Yeah.
Anything else on that, Scott?
No, how do we get everybody unstuck from the pole and start traveling?
There's a great question right there. How do we get people unstuck? I'll tell you how we get people unstuck. Clean the fishbowl. The one thing that nobody is talking about. It's in the Vedic literature. They even give the technology how to do it. That's what we're building in Mount Soma. But it's so far removed from even the notion of what that could mean and what that could be, and even if there's any possibility that that's what's actually going on. But the time will come when it is self-evident, when it is understood. And that time is coming soon. It's a little bit like, some people's teeth are falling out and nobody stops to think about brushing your teeth and cleaning the tartar off. And everybody's blaming different teeth for the cause. Just clean the teeth, clean the fish bowl. It's just that simple, Do you know, Scotty, I saw the thing, in Wisconsin, that that woman who's backed by Soros got a seat in the Supreme Court in Wisconsin. And so by virtue of that, now it's more liberal. That tips the balance in the direction of a liberal orientation. And so what they're saying now is that by virtue of that, the vote, for example, requiring people to have an ID to vote is going to get overruled. It's going to get thrown out. So anybody can go there and vote, and tie that without even being a resident of Wisconsin, no proof required. Now tie that to the idea that only 18% of the money that went to that woman to get her elected came from people within Wisconsin. It was all outside money. George Soros, I think he donated $1 million to getting her elected. Do you know that George Soros' son, do you know this, Scotty? In the past year or so, George Soros' son went and visited, high up officials in the White House 12 or more times. It's in the records. It's in the books.
Why would that be weird?
What's that?
I said, why would that be strange?
Yeah. Well, if it's well known that Soros is, even the guy in the DA in Manhattan that's going after Trump. And it's amazing to, he was funded largely by Soros. And it's remarkable. It's really remarkable. They're saying that, I just said this, but I got to say it again. It's clear, Democrats, Republicans, attorneys from both sides are all saying that they don't have a leg to stand on. That indictment is ridiculous. It's baseless. But they're also saying that Trump will probably get convicted because people are so politically biased. People hate Trump so much that the whole, like I said in the past, there's the law and there's justice, and they have nothing to do with each other. And it's just really remarkable the degree to which that's true, So censorship, and we get into Twitter and censoring this and that, and what we've got going here is a censorship industrial complex. The government now and its links to business. I mean, that's by definition fascism, right, Scotty?
I think
the
so.
Government basically runs the businesses, and they have such control over the businesses and so much power to censor narratives other than their party line. And see, the government's not doing it. It's censorship by surrogate. They get these companies and they get their tentacles into the companies and they get the companies to do it. So it's a vast censorship complex, the weaponization of federal government. Censorship is not about truth. It's about power. They say that they want to censor, what do they call it, Scotty? False fake news, false narratives.
Yeah.
But that's not really what they're doing. it's a play for power, you know. Anyway, I hope all this makes sense. The whole thing about the anatomy of relationships, what they're built out of, so much of it is built on the narratives and the perspectives that a person is vested in. It's not just that they have those perspectives, but they're vested in them. They have to be right about their perspective. Because if they're not, if they're made wrong, it feels like annihilation. And so if you're in a relationship and how do you navigate those waters? How do you navigate those waters? Because if your loved one, for example, says something and you don't agree with it, you can both be off and running, annihilating one another in the name of debating your perspectives. You see, so it becomes a very subtle art. You know, how do you navigate those waters? How do you negotiate, if you will, those situations? Because if you think about it, really, all relationships are a negotiation. You may not even think of it. You may be so relaxed in a relationship that you don't even think about it. But nevertheless, it's in one sense, it's true. We're constantly saying things, and we tend to be self-censoring, careful in what we say. Because otherwise the whole thing is off and running. You get rejected, then you're made wrong, then your ego is hurt, and it just becomes a back and forth, round and around we go thing. Wars are created by virtue of that. All right. I guess that's it for this week, huh, Scotty?
I think so.
Yeah. Thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll talk with you again next week.